What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. We are now on episode 2 of building a custom air suspension kit for my 6th generation Buick LeSabre. Basically a daily driver that I knew I wouldn't be able to leave alone because I've always wanted to bag an H-body GM car. So if you haven't seen the 2 previous episodes on the LeSabre, go back and watch them now. I talk about why I've always wanted one and what I think's cool about them and try to convince you that they are cool. I've always wanted to do one, so we're doing it. That's what this whole channel is about. It's the documentation of what I like in cars, and currently I like Buick LeSabres. In the last episode of the LeSabre, we took all the suspension apart and put everything back together without the springs so we could see just how low the thing would go on the stock shocks. Well, in this episode, we're going one step further and we're gonna start building because everything from Bag Riders just showed up. So I'll run you through my parts list of what I've ordered from Bag Riders and tell you a little bit about my thought process as to why I think some of these parts might work in the LeSabre. Because none of this is bolt-in. We're gonna get a little crafty with this stuff and see if we can build a cool bolt-in air suspension kit. This kit here, this Super Low kit, is for a 2005 to 2007 WRX STI. These are Subaru application front strut assemblies, and I'm hoping we're gonna be able to make these work, and I'll show you why. If you saw the last episode, you already understand a little bit as to how this car is put together and what type of suspension is under it. This is a perfect opportunity to remind you guys that if you use the link in the video's description below, you will get a discount code that you can use on Bag Riders for everything store-wide. So make sure you use that. The 10% discount code, you'll save on anything you want to order from Bag Riders. And that's not just air suspension. They carry a whole bunch, a wide range of products for your car. Oh boy, that is short. Well, there we have it. Bag Riders Super Low, camber adjustment up top, single bellow airbag, fully adjustable body, not the right size dropouts for a Buick LeSabre. All right, so here's a look at the Super Low front strut assembly. You've got a full threaded body here. As you can see, the actual body of the strut is threaded all the way to the bottom. And this dropout mount locks in with this lock collar, and you can adjust this to expand or shorten the overall distance from your knuckle mounts to your strut tower mounts. Bag Riders utilizes a single bellow bag on these kits, rather than a dual bellow or a sleeve bag or something of the sort. I really like single bellow bags. I use them a lot in my cars and I really like the way they ride, which is another reason why I wanted to go with a Super Low kit to modify to work in the Buick LeSabre. Up top, we have camber adjustment, but we also have dampening adjustment, so we can adjust the dampening of the shocks as well. So as you can probably imagine, this Subaru STI kit will not bolt into a 6th gen 89 Buick LeSabre. We've got quite a bit of modifying to do. We have to change the lower mounts and we have to change the upper 3-stud pattern. This pattern is significantly smaller than the 3-bolt stud pattern we have in the strut tower of the LeSabre. I'll pull the driver's side front strut assembly right out of the LeSabre. We'll put it on the table here side by side, and I'll show you exactly what we need to do to get this to work in the LeSabre. Because honestly, I don't know yet. I know we gotta change this and we gotta change this, but how we're gonna do that, I don't know yet. All right, well, here is the stock Buick LeSabre front strut assembly next to the Super Low kit that we are going to make work somehow. We won't be able to lift to factory height more than likely in the front. But that's fine because these cars were up on stilts anyway from the factory. But we are going to a significantly shorter front setup. We know that we have to make a custom top plate. This 3-stud pattern that fits the strut tower of the Buick is far larger than the 3-stud top hat pattern for an 05 to 07 STI. So I do know that these lower dropouts are 1 3/8 inches apart from each other. And just by looking at this, I know that's not the case. I know this is a tighter gap than this is. So we're gonna have to do something custom with these. So 1 7/16, and the Subaru Super Low kit is 1 3/16. So we're a 1/4 inch off. Okay, so we need to open the dropouts up. But how much farther apart are the holes? The Subaru actually looks like it might be a little bit longer. Let's say 3 inches. Oh, much smaller. I'd say that's 2 1/4. What I'd like to do is actually use this dropout. If I can cut this off, if I can like trim this out enough and basically move it over and weld it onto this body, then we'll basically be able to just bolt it in. So I think what I want to do first is make our top hat. We'll cut a few out of cardboard first, just to ensure that they'll work in the car, and also work with the camber adjustment slots on the bag rider's top plate, right? Because we need to be able to basically take this bolt pattern and this center slider slot pattern and put the two together. All right, well, we have cut our first test template, and I cut this giant hole in the center just so I can set it down over the stock plate. So let's see. Ooh, we're close. I think these are the right distance apart. Yes, they are. We'll basically move that up a little bit. We'll move this down a little bit. We'll enlarge these holes just a smidge, and we'll cut another one out of cardboard. All right, we cut a second one. A little bit of alteration to the file. Oh no. How did that get put that far up? I'm gonna cut another one. I went too far up with that hole. I must have completely spaced on my calculations. All right, 2 first samples, 3rd sample. Did we get it right? Here we go. We just gotta make these holes a little bit larger. We are in. That is our top plate, aside from our slots for the pillow ball camber adjustment. So that right there is the beginning of our Buick LeSabre custom top plate. We cut our first piece that will hopefully be our actual top hat. All right, let's see how we did. Boy, that looks pretty good. Wow, I think we nailed it first try, guys. Let's take this file, we'll put it on a thumb drive, and we'll go over here to the CNC table, and we'll cut that thing out of steel. All right, we're in sheet cam now, and I'm setting up my operations. This is our top plate, and I've decided to cut my stud holes as well as the camber adjustment slots on the line. And the outside shape, we're gonna cut on the outside of the line so we get our actual desired size. So with all that considered, let's bounce this down. Bounce it down. And we're not writing music here, but we'll convert this to G code, from DXF to G code, and we'll load this in and we'll cut our first plate, and hopefully we'll nail it. All right, let's see how she did. All right, so I've cleaned the plate up. There's still some mill scale on it, but I basically cleaned it up and verified that we can fit it onto the pillow ball mount on the Super Low kit. And what I want to do now, before we weld anything together, I'm basically going to put some bolts up through these holes like this, put it up through the bottom of the strut tower, and put some nuts on them. Ultimately, I'm going to weld these bolts to the underside of this plate, so this plate will have these studs on them permanently. So before we do that, I want to make sure we can fit this thing. This is going to be the tricky one, I think. Ooh. That right there is a custom top hat plate with camber adjustment slots bolted into the strut tower of a Buick LeSabre. All right, we got a fresh sheet of 3/16 on the table, ready to cut the second top hat. I don't think we got to make any file changes. I think we can just slice this thing out. Now, for those wondering, 3/16, you know, we could go to 1/4 inch with this. We could. All the weight of the car ultimately is sitting on the center of this plate, but is surrounded by the strut tower, right? So they kind of sandwich together. I have made a lot of these top hats out of this 3/16, and I've never had one bend, including my long wheelbase Toyota Century, which arguably weighed between 6,000 and 7,000 pounds. I mean, that thing was just massive, and it never bent on me. All right, guys, well, we have the studs welded into the plates. Those aren't going anywhere. And luckily, we have successfully welded them in place. So we are good to go. We are in up top. In our strut tower, we are looking at a 6th gen Buick LeSabre front top hat with camber adjustability and dampening control. Basically, it's just hanging in the wheel well now, but what I've done to show you on this other one here. So what I wanna make sure right now is that we can at least get enough lift out of this, because I don't wanna start cutting and welding and find out that at full lift, this car still scrapes on the ground or doesn't get up above the tires. And oddly enough, the bolts that go through the knuckle on the Buick that are just massive will actually pass through the top hole on the dropout of our Super Low kit. So what I've done is, since the dropouts aren't wide enough to accept the knuckle, I've put a jack underneath the lower control arm and gotten this up high enough to where I could put the bolt through the top hole of the knuckle and through both top holes of our Super Low dropout to ultimately hang the front end off of our Super Low kit. Now, we're obviously not lined up or bolted in completely, but now what I can do is I can put a wheel on and just get an idea with the stock wheel and tire combination what our full height will look like. So this worked out really well in our favor, because this allows us to do some test fitting that I didn't think we'd get a chance to do. Oh, easily. We've got so much wheel gap. Oh, let's start cutting. We're good to go. Here's a better look at what full lift would be where the lower dropouts are currently indexed on that Super Low strut body. All right, we're gonna unthread this lower dropout because it'll make it easier for us to cut all of this off and weld these on. Because inside here are unvented flammable gases, fluids. And my father and I both have had one of these explode on us before. Not the Super Low kit, it was one of the universal airlift kits that you welded these dropouts onto from the factory. And we just laid into it a little too hard, a little bit too long, and we punctured the wall and ignited the pressurized flammable fluids. Luckily, in this scenario, all we have to do is unthread this mount, and there's nothing flammable inside this, so we can cut and weld to it as we please. We went to the point of no return on the Buick LeSabre front strut assemblies. If these dropouts were far enough apart from each other to fit over the knuckle in the LeSabre, I would weld this hole up and then drill the new one just above it, because I think we'd have to put it just above this hole. That would be the easiest way to do this, and that's what I've done in other applications, like my Porsche 924S. We use this same 05 to 07 Subaru kit for that car. We'll clean this up, clean it up real well, and we'll cut all of this off and ultimately weld this onto this. And now we don't need to mess with making sure our distances are right, our holes are right, everything is as it should be. We now have a universal or blank Bag Rider Super Low threaded sleeve. So now that we've got this stripped down, what we're ultimately going to try to do is take our dropouts. We cut off the factory LeSabre front strut assembly where I've got my new plug weld holes, and ultimately do that. So I didn't cut these sides long enough off of the other struts. And as you can see, we have quite a gap right there that I don't want to bridge with weld. The weight of the front end is ultimately sitting on this point, and we're gonna weld this to this. So this has to be done safely. What I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna cut some 3/16 plate just long enough to basically bridge over this, and we can weld this in and then weld our plate, which will basically span a little bit farther over the edge of the pipe here. So we'll get a solid weld there, a solid weld here. But also we're gonna plug weld right down the center, which will be real strong. All right, guys, we have the first lower dropout made, welded up. I was really worried I was gonna mess up the threads on the inside, but I've been able to thread this onto the strut body and it does go on fine. Now, I know that inside this was still powder coated. So I kind of took my time, held my breath. I opened even the back door here in the shop to keep airflow through, because you don't want to breathe that stuff at all. I stripped most of where I was going to be welding off of the pipe. I left a little bit here on the back, but on the inside is what we were burning off. So I did my best to not breathe any of those fumes. It honestly would have been the best route to basically chem strip this, do all my welding, and then a repowder coat from there. So now we have a threaded adjustable body that will slide onto a Buick LeSabre knuckle. Stoked on that. Boy, oh boy, is this pretty cool. All right, so I got the other side front strut, lower mount dropouts cut off. And what I may or may not have mentioned already is when you're doing something like this, you want to be careful not to cut through the housing of the shock body because of the fluids that are in here. They're usually under pressure and they are flammable. Keeping that in mind while I was cutting these off, this one I got a little bit more careless with because I'd already done the first one and realized that I could kind of tell when I'd cut through this collar that the dropouts are on and not into the wall of the housing. But as I took those dropouts off, I could smell fluid. It's got that gear oil kind of smell to it. And I looked closer, and right here at the bottom, I actually accidentally cut through. And there's some fluid coming through right there. Luckily, not under a bunch of pressure, and luckily I didn't have it super hot enough to ignite it. But that is what's kind of scary about this. Well, we have the passenger side lower gussets, or lower dropouts rather, welded onto our threaded body for the Super Low kit. All there is left to do now is thread it on, make sure I didn't gum up any of those threads. I didn't want to do one long consecutive weld. I could have if I wanted to be all showy with it. And and honestly, I thought about grinding them all down and smoothing everything out, and making them all look all pretty, but I might just leave them. I decided not to drill out as many holes on the inside there. On that inside sleeve, that'll be more than enough there, and the amount of welding we have on the sides. And I kind of filled in the top ears a little bit. And I kind of took the flap wheel to them to kind of smooth them out a little bit. Well, let's just make sure that this lower mount will thread onto the strut body without issue. And we'll be ready to assemble this and get it put in the car. Okay, so since I've threaded this lower mount on to the end of the threads on the strut body, I'm taking a measurement from lock ring to lock ring to make sure we're comparable to the same distance overall as the one that's already in the car on the driver's side. So we have 5 inches on the dot from lock ring to lock ring on the one we're gonna put on the passenger side. And the one that's already in the car looks like we are 5 inches on the dot as well. So that's exactly what I did on this first one. So let's put the other strut assembly in on the other side. We'll lock everything down. Maybe we'll put a makeshift airline out of the port on the strut assemblies, bring them out to an airline out here or something. That way we can use shop air to articulate the suspension and see what our overall lift will be and what our drop will be. Because I think the way this car is set up, I don't think we're gonna have any problem with drop. I think we're gonna get to the ground just fine. The overall goal is to get this car to ride as close to as well as it did from the factory, which I don't know if we're gonna be able to do because we're going to a smaller tire, which won't ride as well as the giant balloon tires. But we are going to air suspension, which does ride nice if you set it up properly. So that's kind of the goal here. I want this thing to ride as close to stock feeling as possible. Okay, so while the paint dries on our top hats and our lower mounts, I'm gonna get a fitting put in our airbags here for the front. This front strut kit comes with black leader lines, which are basically a stainless steel braided airline, which kind of has a lot more durability to it than just your DOT plastic airline that goes in. And we'll talk more about that when we plumb the car. That'll be in a future episode coming up real soon once we start running airlines and stuff. We'll talk about fittings and airline more. But what I'll probably do right now is I'll at least get those leader lines sealed and threaded into these strut assemblies so they can just stay with the strut assemblies as we install and remove them from the car before the rest of the car is plumbed. And that will allow us to hook shop air into that leader line so we can actually articulate this airbag. Okay, so the fittings that come with the Super Low front strut assembly kit basically allow you to run your black stainless braided line out of your strut assembly, right? So on one end we have a 1/4 inch NPT, and on the other end we've got the 1/8 inch NPT, and these swivel against the line. And the 1/8 inch is the one that will go into the strut assembly. But since this fitting will more than likely be indexed at the back when it's in the car, the inner fender well will be like right here. And I don't know what kind of space we have. I didn't measure it. So they do provide these elbows, and we'll utilize these. So this is an 1/8 inch male to 1/8 inch female NPT elbow, which means we can put this elbow in our bag there to get our trajectory heading out and not directly back. And we can thread our leader line into this elbow. But before we tighten everything up, we'll put some sealant on it so it won't leak. We won't have to do this again when we plumb the car. This will already be done. Okay, so we have one leader line threaded in and sealed. We just got one more to do and then we'll install. Paint's dry, got everything painted. You know, I thought about sending these out to get powder coated, but for now I just primered them and painted them, and we're just gonna get them in the car for now. Maybe later I'll take them apart and get them powder coated if they seem to wear pretty badly. But for now, we'll just keep them painted. Also, before the comment section, I've been bagging cars a long time. Well, maybe not as long as some people watching this, but about 15 years. And I've used all sorts of thread sealant. I've got paste here, I've got paste with and without Teflon, and I've got the tape. I've got a few different types of tape. I've used 5 different products probably, and I've got cars that have 0 leaks with every single one of them. So argue amongst yourselves if you prefer the paste, the Teflon paste, you know, the brush-on liquid essentially, or the tape. But honestly, the last 3, 4, maybe even 5 cars that I've bagged, I've used the tape that is provided from Aerof Performance or Bag Riders, and I have no leaks, 0 leaks. So honestly, if you're bagging a car for the first time, the tape that they provide is sufficient. You don't have to let anyone beat up on you. This is sufficient. I own cars right now that are completely plumbed with this tape, and I have 0 leaks. You just gotta make sure everything's tight enough, and you gotta make sure you have ample tape. So that's my 2 cents on that. I'm not an expert. I just have experience with a handful of different sealants. Indeed, leave your favorite sealant down in the comments below. Let me know what you prefer and what your experience is with that product, because I'd love to know. All right, guys, well, I would say we've got our fronts done. Aside from testing and possibly powder coat later on down the road, we're done. These fronts will bolt in. I'm actually really stoked on these. I know that these cars have been bagged, but I really wanted to level up the quality of the parts used in a car that you wouldn't normally see these parts in. You know, like these are still the grandma spec cars. And I hope that changes. They're affordable, they're cheap to buy, they're cheap to maintain, they're incredibly reliable. And you usually find them in great condition because they've sat in a garage, because whoever bought them new was elderly. So having a modern front strut assembly, I think, was just the best route to go with this car. It bolts in the bottom, it bolts in up top. It's got multiple settings for our dampening control and the shocks. We've got our camber adjustment. The single bellow bag rides really well at low ride heights. And we've got a full adjustable body to dial in our height exactly where we want it. Nice leader lines. All right, guys, we're all bolted in. I spared you the footage of a 3rd time assembly, if that's even how many we've had in this episode so far. But our new bolt-in Buick LeSabre air suspension is installed. And man, how awesome is it to have a bolt-in air suspension application? Even our brake hose guide bracket bolts right back in. as OEM as we could get. Ultimately, when we run our airlines, the leader line will escape through here somewhere, but I've got them running forward right now because we'll hook some air up to them. I'll put the wheels back on. We'll make this thing go up and down. This side all bolted in, brake hose guide all attached. Okay, so I've connected 2 lengths of 1/4-inch airline from each leader line that comes off of our new strut assemblies to this PTC T-fitting to another little piece of 1/4-inch line to a Schrader valve. It's a PTC fitting to a Schrader valve, so we can just use shop air to inflate the airbags up front, and we can obviously remove the core or just press in on the core to deflate the bags to ultimately lower the car. So I'm gonna put some PSI in the bags now so they're not totally deflated, so when we set the car down on the wheels, we won't have to like go through a whole production of trying to jack the car up to get the lift arms out, because the rear is still just shocks, which sat lower than the front on just shocks. So we might have to get a jack under there to get the lift arms out, because I would love to set the car down on all 4 wheels and air it out in the front and just see if we can lay the engine cradle out. There is a possibility we'd have to remove the wheels and the 2 lower knuckle mounts to thread the body up on the strut assembly more if we can't lay the car out. That is less wheel gap now at full droop than we had with the stock suspension in it, which is crazy. So at full height, we're already lower than stock suspension. Well, the front end of the car is being held up by the airbags. So it's strong enough to hold the weight of the car. I got the rear end jacked up and got the lift arms out from the back, and now we're sitting on all 4 tires. So basically just the rear factory shocks completely compressed and bottomed out, and our new Super Low STI, but now LeSabre front air struts. So I'm gonna let some air out of the front and we'll see just how low it goes with where I've threaded that body. All right, here we go. Oh, we have so much farther to go. We might just have to take everything apart. I want to see this thing laid out on the ground. Okay, so off camera, I just got 2 jacks underneath the front end, jacked everything up, got the wheels off, undid the knuckle bolts, the brake line guide, all of that, and spun the bodies up quite a ways. Seeing where it's sitting now, this is at full lift, I think. I think this is at like 100 PSI in the bags. So I guesstimated that the engine cradle was probably 2 or 3 inches off the ground when we aired it out for the first time. So I cranked the bodies of the lower dropouts up like 3.5 or 4 inches just to see what overall height was gonna be and where our drop will be. So without further ado, let's air this thing out once more and we'll see if the engine cradle goes on the ground on the factory size tires. All right, first air down V2. Oh, we're almost there. Oh, how are we not touching the ground? Oh, we can make it happen though. We have like 1 inch to go. And honestly, our wheel tire combo is gonna be smaller than this. So we'd be on the ground with any other wheel tire combo, for sure. Well, we're getting closer, guys. I'm gonna leave it there for this episode because as we're sitting right now on the stock balloon tires, we are aired out, completely laid out. That engine cradle will be touching the floor with any other wheel tire combo we put under this car. And you'll have to wait for another episode or 2, but I've already locked in a set of wheels for this car. And it's gonna really, really excite a lot of you and maybe not make any sense to others. So I'll leave it there. It might not be in the next episode because the next episode we're gonna work on the rear suspension. I was hoping to kind of compile the 2, but it's been really fun documenting building this front setup that we're out of time for this episode. We're just gonna leave it here. As I'm sitting here, I'm gonna start on that rear suspension. This is much lower than it was in the last episode you saw the Buick. This right here is significantly lower. So we don't need to take this thing apart again just to see the engine cradle on the ground in this episode on the wire hubcaps. But as you can see, yeah, take a look right there. We are just about laid out. That is barely an inch. Man, I am so stoked on this thing. And I agree with a lot of you guys. A lot of you left comments in the last episode saying how much you loved the stock wheels with the stock wheel covers. And I like it too. I do like the idea of widened steelies, so we get that flush look from the wheel to fender and that wide track width look with a meteor tire, but with the factory wheel covers. I do like that, but that's not the way we're gonna go. And like I said, a lot of you guys are gonna be super stoked on the wheels I'm gonna put on this car. But I'm expecting to go lower in the rear with our wheel tire combo. Is gonna get us another inch or 2 inches, so we'll see if we need to do anything there. I've got a couple ideas as to how we can get even lower than the factory shock, and we'll explore those options in the next episode. I'm really looking forward to diving into this rear suspension too. Man, those stocks are just stuffed in there. All right, guys, that's all the time we have for this episode. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed putting it together and building the front suspension. I'm super happy with how this thing came out. We'll know more once we drive it, but for right now, as far as design goes, I couldn't be happier with the fit and our drop. I know a lot of you guys are here because of this Buick series. I hope you stick around for some of the other projects I have. Some I've finished, some I'm still working on, some I have yet to start. But welcome to the channel. I really appreciate you guys being here. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's helping this whole thing grow in a massive way. We're doing a Buick drop. I've said it the last few episodes. We couldn't not do a Buick LeSabre shirt, so stay tuned for the drop there. I'm thinking in the next 2 weeks, we're gonna have something ready for you guys. Until then, thanks again for the support. We'll see you in the next episode when we work on the rear suspension of the LeSabre.